I have an update on that Planet X, and there's some good news and some bad news. The good news is that there really does appear to be life on that world. The bad news is that we already knew that, and the world is Earth. But don't forget that our home is an exoplanet to the entire rest of the universe, merely an exoplanet. And the spectra that you saw are actual spectra of Earth taken from space. It's Earth as a dot, and that is the view that aliens would have if they were looking at Earth as though it were an exoplanet. And so they would find water, they would find oxygen, and they would maybe, as we said, maybe it looks like vegetation, but we're not sure. And of course, we don't know what's on their planet, so they may not even know about vegetation. Well, who is out there? What are the prospects for life in our galaxy? I've written this, it sounds a little bit flippant, but it's actually an important question. Is intelligent life on the universe's to-do list? There was a famous physicist, John Wheeler, who in the 1980s asked, he had a conjecture, he had a hypothesis that the machinery of life, of the universe, that is the laws of nature, might be so arranged as to guarantee the development of intelligent life. And he had all kinds of reasons coming from physics for that. But it's interesting to see what astronomers actually think now. And there used to be, in the old view, people were quite skeptical. Well, the universe is a hostile place with all those exploding stars and black holes, and you have to have the right DNA sequences, and those are rare, and how would life actually form? And we have only one example of life on a planet, that would be Earth, so how can we say anything? But I think there's a modern view that's emerging that the universe is exquisitely constructed to favor life. And we know now that the right DNA, the right sequence of amino acids and proteins is not rare, as I hope to convince you. Life didn't just appear, it thrived, and it now really has transformed the planet, of course, because there's oxygen in the air and there are living things all over the surface of the planet. It really has, it's not a tenant, it owns Earth. And I want to just provide a few lines of evidence, just describe this, because I think they tell us a little bit about how wonderful, how marvelous life really is. If you want to read more about this, I've written a book on this. You can just Google Roy Gould, Amazon, and you'll get there. You can read chapters of it online, and you'll see other books in this same field. So there's a lot out there that's been written on this. The first line of evidence I want to talk about is the diversity of life, and I want to play a little game. Life is so diverse, so varied on Earth, that it's sometimes hard to tell the difference between what's real and what is the Hollywood imagination. So I'm going to show you, let's play this game. I'll show you a series of slides pretty quickly, maybe a few seconds each, and you have to make a snap decision as to which ones are real and which ones are Hollywood imagination, okay? And we'll start with this thing. Okay. Did you want to see that again? I've seen that. There's a Yoda. All right, time to vote, and we'll just vote on these 6. How about this monster fish? Which ones are not real? The tree and the pussycat down here at the lower left. The tree is not real. You are all so good. Actually, they're all real. But you're right about the tree. The tree is actually a drawing from a fossil. So it did live on Earth, but it doesn't live on Earth now. That's why it doesn't look familiar. But to tell you the truth, none of these others look familiar as well. On the upper right, that's an axolotl from Mexico. It's actually, it's a kind of newt or salamander. And that caterpillar is just bizarre. Okay, and the blobfish at the lower right is real, and it's a deep sea fish, and it suffers a little bit when it comes up. It looks better, and it would be happier if you saw it in its natural environment. So, now there's a second. So life is so diverse. In fact, there are bacteria that live in the clouds. There are organisms that live a mile underground in cracks in the rocks. There are glowworms in caves that never come out of the caves. Life has really taken over every niche on Earth. There are organisms that live inside the ice of Antarctica, where it never thaws, and they somehow are able to get enough water from the surrounding ice and from the sunshine to stay alive. So life has taken hold. Now, there's another characteristic of life here on Earth that to me it's almost contradictory to the diversity, and this I just find astounding. Life is unbelievably enduring. So here you're seeing, anybody know what this is? So we're looking at a strand of DNA. So I took a living cell and I disrupted it with a drop of dishwashing detergent, spread it on a slide, put it in the electron microscope, and you see the debris of the cell. And you can see there are 3 strands of DNA, but one of them has these 3 Christmas tree-like things on them. So there's the DNA strand, and then those Christmas trees represent genes. Those are the active regions of the DNA that are actually producing something. There are little protein molecules dancing along that, moving along the strand of DNA, reading the information in that gene, and they're making RNA, which is another form of chemical information, and that RNA will go out into the cell and then help make proteins that do the work of the cell. Now, the astounding thing about this, I love this picture because you're looking at the machinery of life, and this machinery is common to every living thing, no matter how diverse it is. In fact, essentially every living thing. No biologist could say for certain what animal or plant this came from. And they couldn't tell whether this was made 10 years ago, yesterday, 1,000 years ago, 100 million years ago, even billions of years ago, because this machinery of life has remained unchanged for at least 2.5 billion years, and likely more than 3.5 billion years. So it is as enduring as the oldest rocks on Earth. Now that's a sign. What does it tell us? Well, that there's something special about the machinery of life, and it's something that's really part and parcel of our universe. It's not just sort of an accident that happened and didn't go away. And just for comparison, here's some other machine parts. They're parts you can see there for your car DVD, and for one of those drone airplanes. And by law, you have to keep those parts on sale for 10 years, but try, if you have a washing machine, try to get parts for last year's model, or try to come back in 10,000 years and see if your washing machine still works. Here we're talking about interchangeable parts. You can put a gene from a potato into a human being and it will function, and vice versa if you want it to go that way. And in fact, that's been done with humans and mice, and we won't go there. But you can put genes from plants like a tomato, or like a fish into a plant like a tomato, and have them function. So there is something strange. And now the question is, how can life be so diverse on the one hand and yet preserve the old ways at the same time, preserve its machinery? And I want to just very quickly show you this because it is a big discovery in biology, and it does help us realize how special DNA and information in the genes is. So I want to mutate a sentence. Sentence is, this is what I mean. That's simple. This is what I mean. Now, if I change a few of the letters, this is what I mean. Well, you still understand the same meaning. This is what I mean. So I'm not spelling so good here. So that, okay. And we could keep changing these letters and we would still more or less get the same meaning. There are bacteria, for example, that have mutated to change 80% of their letters in their genes and still have the same gene function. So it's almost, a complete morph of the gene, and yet still. On the other hand, suppose I went back and I changed a few different letters, thus, if wet, I'm mean. Completely different meaning, now we're going in a different direction. So what we see here, these paths diverging as though they were from a Robert Frost poem, that's not the way life works. You don't have to choose one or the other. In real life, nature takes those paths and intertwines them so that the pathways for preserving the old are never far from the pathways for innovating and creating new forms of life. And so we're able to preserve the machinery of life at the same time that we spin out all these other incredible life forms. Now, the last thing I want to mention is convergent evolution, because this is something that is also pretty much a new discovery. We've always known examples of convergent evolution ever since Darwin. Darwin noticed that there are these luminescent squid. They actually, the glowing underneath are actually bacteria that the squid actually cultivates on its underside so that it looks more like the sky above, and so you don't see its silhouette against the sky. So predators underneath it can't think it's not there. And this arrangement has actually evolved at least 6 different times independently. And it took a lot of work, so it's amazing that it happens. Spruce and pine trees are another example. I always thought, aren't they sort of like cousins of each other at least? But they haven't had a common ancestor for 140 million years. They're as unrelated to each other as we are to Koala Bear, even though they kind of look similar. But they both had to evolve as they moved northward. They had to evolve cold tolerance, and that took dozens of genes. And incredibly, they both evolved in much the same way. So the genes changed in parallel. And that again tells us that there's something very strange going on. Things mutate and become diverse, but they also sort of head in the same direction as well. I'm going to skip over this one because it's a cactus. I like this one, the sea butterfly. The sea butterfly is a snail. You can see that shell on the bottom. It's heavier than water, and unfortunately it falls to the bottom, so it needs some way to, it's not buoyant. So it has to get some way to get up to the top where it feeds. And so it has evolved these, they're not fins or flippers, they're wings. Here's a movie of it. And so it flies just like a bird. And so it has evolved the mechanism. It not just flaps its wings, but it actually rotates them just as a bird does. And that's not easy to do. There's a whole set of mechanisms for your muscles that help you do that. We can do it because we have such great control of our muscles, but to evolve that ability when you're just a snail, that's, so snail, these sea snails are the birds of the sea. Here's one, it's a katydid. This is a form of grasshopper. Looks like a leaf, doesn't it? We humans have an exquisite ear that has 3 parts to it with a, an eardrum, and then there's some bones that transmit the pressure. And then there are these nerve cells that are arranged like the keys of a piano, and they respond to different pitches. Well, believe it or not, it was just discovered that the katydid has evolved a very similar ear with 3 parts to it, and in the innermost part are these nerve cells arranged like the keys of a piano that respond to different frequencies. The katydid's ear is not in its head, it's in the knee of its leg. Right there where it bends. I know it's gross, but that's where it evolved. So again, something very complex that has appeared again. And finally, I just want to show you this, this example. It's one of my favorites because I happened to discover it by accident, and that shows you how common convergent evolution is now. So this is on the right, you're seeing a leafcutter ant with those kind of terrifying jaws, and when I saw those, for some reason they remind me of a hyena jaw. I don't know why. So I Googled hyena jaw and found this picture on the left. And that if you look at them side by side, see the jaw, look at the front tooth, and look at that little projection to both of them. And then look at the second tooth. It's that little one, it's got a little notch there. There's the same tooth on the ant jaw. Look at the hyena's molar there, the back, the leftmost tooth. And it's got that little notch in it, and you can see the ant has a molar of sorts. And of course, these two animals are not related. I mean, they go back 600 million years since they've ever been related. And yet, and they're made of completely different materials. The jaw is bone. The plant is made of, the ant is made of chitin, which is akin to cellulose, so it's closer to a plant than it is to a hyena. That's amazing. I just find that. So there is something about evolution coming up constantly with similar solutions to the same problem. So what do we expect? Well, we've really entered a new age of discovery. Most of my colleagues in astronomy will not say it on the record, but off the record, they all are just certain that the universe is teeming with life, and they can't wait to find it. And even though we don't have evidence for life yet on other worlds, I think the sense is now that we've crossed the threshold. We, the people of Earth, right? That's us. This is a new age of discovery, and I'll end here by saying I'm happy that we're all a part of this. So it'll be a very exciting next few years in this field.